Honorable European institution, as European citizen and mother of a European child, with this video I do really want to bring to your attention my appeal made and transmitted on November the 16th, 2020 to Italian institutions, Mr. President Mattarella, Mr. Prime Minister Conte, Minister Azzolina, Health Minister Speranza, and Deputy Health Minister Stileri. This video appeal requests for the reopening of Italian schools, closed for those students attending the secondary school, and now in a great number of regions also for those aged 12 and 13, that is, for those attending the lower secondary school or so-called middle school. The video message which I would like you to be informed of, as Italian students are also European students indeed, was about the following. Honorable Mr. President Mattarella, Honorable Mr. President Conte, Honorable Education Minister Ms. Azzolina, Honorable Minister Mr. Speranza, and Honorable Deputy Minister Mr. Stileri. My name is Chiara Taddei and I am mother of a 12-year-old girl attending the second year of the so-called secondary school of first grade, that is middle school or lower secondary school, which is attended by pupils aged from 11 to 13. I live in Tuscany and therefore from Sunday, November the 15th, in the so-called red zone, the one with the highest restriction concerning coronavirus. I declare myself, like the governor of my region, Eugenio Gianni, bitter and amazed to find ourselves today in the red zone, passing from the yellow one, that is the lowest, the one with the lowest restrictions, to orange to red zone in a week, and on the basis of an algorithm that evaluates data from November the 2nd to November the 8th. For this reason, my daughter and our Tuscan children attending the second and third grades of their lower secondary school, that is 12 and 13 years old pupils, find themselves once again, as their friends attending high level of secondary school, forced to stay at home in front of a monitor doing distance learning. I wonder why. From the continuous declaration of EU institutions, we read that the percentage of infections linked or due to schools is low, very low. So Dr. Villani, medical doctor making part of Italian Scientific Technical Committee, in an interview to Corriere.it, defines the percentage of infections in school as a contribution to infections very low. Closing it would mean depriving pupils of controlled place where they can meet without risking contagion. Thus, Minister Azzolina and the Italian Scientific Technical Committee, which, as we read in Orizzonte Scuola, reassure about the situation of school infections, with the minister declaring that the situation in schools is closely monitored and, on the basis of the Italian Scientific Technical Committee, reassures that younger children are infected less than adults, a trend also outlined by some international studies, also emphasizing that for adolescents a prolonged closure of schools is likely to have psychological consequences, even very serious. Italy is divided in two regarding to school, indeed into three parts, because I do not want to forget the thousands of high school students who, forced by the lack of public transport, must be at home in front of the monitor, paying a very high price for system failures. After them, the second and third graders of their lower secondary school, I remind you once again, 12 and 13 years old pupils, have been affected by this change, leaving only the first graders, 11 years old pupils, attending classrooms at school. This choice has been justified by the fact that first grade children are entering a new experience and indeed need to get to know their classmates and teachers. In addition, they need to acquire a new method of study. Presidents and ministers. This correct motivation does not take into consideration all the references made by you institutions, but even more, it does not consider other factors, other important factors. The first, current children attending the second and third graders of their lower secondary school, that is 12 years old children, are those who last school year from March to the end, experiencing exactly what you now, with this decision, rightly want to avoid to those now entering the lower secondary school. The children of the current second grade in March went home from one day to the next, interrupting the breaking that process of relationship and knowledge that you define fundamental and on the basis of which you live in presence the first class of the middle school. And now they are again back home in front of a monitor, that is, current children attending the second grade of middle school are once again in front of a monitor, exactly as last year. The second factor, the third grade children, age 13, who are preparing for the important transition to high school have also undergone the last school year from March to the end, and non-didactic that now find themselves repeating, risking to conclude the cycle with a continuous alternation of absence and presence, experiencing a half cycle. What's the point of all this? I ask you to rethink on the basis of all your statements and those of the Italian Scientific Technical Committee to keep at least children of lower secondary school all in presence without further divisions in Italy. A different Italy as regards access to education, the real one, in presence at school, is not an Italy neither free nor equal. By keeping at home 12 and 13 years old pupils and older students, the reality is that we forget about them and children are always the last on the list. Presidents, ministers, distance learning, the harmful effects of which have been underlined by the Italian Scientific Technical Committee itself and by Minister Azzolina, is the teaching of inequality, And it isn't all about the possibility of having technological resources. No, not just that. It is inequality, because many children are left alone at home, with platforms that often give problems, not knowing how to handle a system for which the public school does not provide, in the first cycle of education but also after, a structured and formal education, that is, computer science. They are alone with parents at work, or even worse, to avoid leaving them alone with grandparents, still creating that vicious cycle that is willingly set in order to avoid meeting between children and fragile population as coronavirus concerns, that is, their grandparents. 12 and 13 years old children without devices, sometimes forced to follow on the stairs of the condos due to the lack of network connection, children alone at home without that help that at school in presence have and can always have by the adult of reference, the teacher. Alienated in front of a monitor without the relationship, the real one, from which the learnings go through. Unless we want to forget years of research on the psychopedagogy of learning, as Dr. Daniele Novara reminds, as pedagogy's founder and director of the Psychopedagogical Center for Education and Conflict Management. Learnings go through relationship. I ask you to work now because if you wish you can do so, as you have shown to be able to take decision in a minimal time, working a different and coherent choice according to the principles of equality in education. A kind of Italy different from Europe that instead let its young people be at school, a kind of Italy different in its own home regarding school, is a profoundly different Italy, not right, because at school, in class, girls and boys are all equal. At home, in front of a monitor, they are not. And distance learning, which is alienation and inequality, puts at risk not only the psychological well-being of those who live it, but risks concretely contributing to school dropout. And so, school is no longer the place that allows even the weakest young population, socially and economically, to have the possibility of a social redemption that makes us so free, yes, equal. Presidents, ministers, accept the comments of experts of the Italian Scientific Technical Committee and make an equal Italy on an education level. Let our children go to school, go back to school, and let them attend it in presence, in coherence with Europe, where pupils go to school at least until the completion of compulsory education, and according with the information data that we have in hand. Send girls and boys back to school. Let them go back to school. Do it immediately, because you can do it. Equal education in the different areas of Italy, standardizing the situation starting at least from the lower secondary school, 12 and 13 years old children, allowing them to be all in presence throughout Italy, from now until June. Distance teaching is alienation and inequality. Any shutdown, the so-called lockdown, should not and cannot ignore this. Our children are European citizens too. Bring them back to class. Make them really equal.